I want a divorce. I've met someone else. That was the message Henry Walker read at 10:12 a.m. mid-sip of lukewarm office coffee, while reviewing a fraud alert for a client at Pinnacle Financial Systems in Richmond. His wife of 22 years, Caroline, was supposedly at a marketing conference in Dallas. Instead, she was ending their marriage through 2 sentences and a screen. Seconds later, another message buzzed in. I've already moved the retirement funds into my private account. You can keep the house. I won't need it anymore. Henry didn't throw his phone. He didn't call her. He didn't even flinch. He simply opened his secure monitoring dashboard, the one he'd personally built to track high-risk financial transactions, and watched the system work. Every joint account, every investment, every dollar they shared triggered red flags the moment Caroline made the transfers. She thought she was being clever, fast, decisive, but she had no idea that Henry's systems had been quietly protecting their finances for years. Systems designed not just for clients, but for himself. By noon, the accounts she tried to move funds into were frozen, pending federal review. Caroline didn't know it yet, but the real shock wasn't that Henry had caught her. It was that she never stood a chance. Caroline believed she was fast enough, that if she moved the money while Henry was distracted, too busy with spreadsheets and code, she could quietly vanish with nearly $800,000 of their retirement savings. But what she didn't understand was this: Henry Walker didn't just work in fraud detection. He built the system from the ground up. At Pinnacle Financial, Henry wasn't just another analyst. He was the architect behind one of the most sensitive financial monitoring systems on the East Coast, an integrated dashboard capable of tracking multi-party transactions, pattern anomalies, and threshold breaches in real time. And he didn't leave work at the office. Years ago, after witnessing the financial ruin of a close client due to a spouse's covert withdrawals, Henry adapted a personal version of the system, quietly, without fanfare, not out of distrust, but out of diligence. When Caroline initiated her transfers from their retirement portfolio and brokerage accounts to her private bank, she unknowingly tripped every alarm bell Henry had programmed: inconsistent IP address, unverified recipient, single-party override on a joint account. The system didn't ask questions. It acted, it flagged, documented, and immediately sent requests for manual verification from both parties, freezing the transactions by protocol. Henry watched as each account locked itself down like clockwork. Not a single dollar left their control. By lunchtime, he had received confirmation from the financial institution's transfers pending review, deposits frozen, accounts marked for federal compliance hold due to suspicious activity. Caroline likely thought she was moments away from buying plane tickets, setting up a new life, maybe even surprising her new partner with a down payment on a condo. Instead, all she'd see was access denied. Henry didn't gloat. He didn't blast the news to friends or family. There was no vindictive impulse, only a methodical calm. He returned to his desk, logged into the system, double-checked the backup logs, and ensured that all triggers had executed flawlessly. Everything had gone exactly as he designed. His phone buzzed with her third message of the day. I hope you don't make this messy. He didn't reply. At 5:00 p.m., Henry went home, walked through the front door of their quiet colonial in Chesterfield, and sat in the same kitchen where Caroline had once suggested they name their future kids after jazz musicians. He poured a glass of water, reheated leftover soup, and watched as new alerts rolled in: 2 failed attempts to access the accounts through mobile devices, and 1 login from an unknown IP in Phoenix. Phoenix, not Dallas. So that was the truth. The conference was a lie. The hotel reservation she'd mentioned didn't exist. Henry flagged the geolocation data and forwarded it to his private legal counsel, a former white-collar investigator who owed him a favor. That night, Henry slept soundly, not because his heart wasn't heavy. 22 years of shared life doesn't evaporate without pain, but because he knew he wasn't left defenseless. His systems didn't operate on hope. They worked on rules, triggers, and verifiable action. Caroline had bet on speed, but Henry had already built the racetrack, and she hadn't read the rules. The next morning, he checked the balances again. Every account remained untouched, secured under automated hold pending federal verification. He'd done nothing manual, no human override. Everything had been locked down by code that didn't care about marriage, heartbreak, or intentions, only compliance. By 10:00 a.m., he received a call from the receiving bank's fraud division. Mr. Walker, we're reviewing attempted large deposits into an account under Caroline Walker's name. Due to dual authorization requirements and system alerts, all incoming funds have been frozen. We'll need your signature to confirm the transactions were not authorized. He didn't hesitate. They weren't. Do what you need to do, and that was it. No drama, no shouting. Just quiet, irreversible consequence. Henry sat back in his chair, opened a new case file on his work dashboard, and went back to doing what he did best, watching for patterns that most people never see until it's too late. The clues had always been there, small, scattered fragments that didn't scream betrayal, but whispered just loud enough for someone paying close attention. The problem was, Henry Walker hadn't been listening. At least, not with the ears of a husband. As a fraud analyst, he would have flagged the behavior instantly. But as a man who believed in his marriage, he'd brushed it all aside. Looking back now, the pattern was undeniable. 6 months earlier, Caroline had stopped asking about their retirement goals. For years, they'd reviewed numbers together. How much they'd saved, what they'd need to retire early, what cabin in Vermont they might eventually buy. But around the holidays, the conversation shifted. When Henry brought up Roth conversions or market conditions, she nodded absently, replying with phrases like, "Let's not stress about money right now," or "You always make it so complicated." 3 months ago, she opened a credit card without telling him. That alone didn't raise alarms. Plenty of couples manage personal credit separately, but Caroline had always been transparent. The statement came in a bright envelope marked urgent, and when Henry asked about it, she waved it off. "It's just for work travel," she'd said. "Reimbursements go straight on there now. Company policy." Then, 2 weeks before the so-called conference in Dallas, she'd complained that the guest room felt too cluttered. That part had made him pause. "Who visits us anymore anyway?" she said while folding laundry. "Feels like we're just keeping stuff for people who never come." It was an odd comment. His sister had just stayed over for Thanksgiving. Their niece had visited in September, but Henry didn't push. Caroline always had a flair for dramatics when she was overwhelmed. Now, in hindsight, those moments lined up like dominoes. The most telling sign came the night before she left. They had dinner. Her favorite stir-fry, the one he always added too much garlic to, and over a second glass of wine she casually asked, "So, how much do we actually have in retirement accounts?" Henry had raised an eyebrow. Between all three, 40 Wonk, Roth, and SEP were sitting just under 800,000. She smiled. "That's more than I thought." He asked, "No reason. Just curious." That curiosity now had context. She had been calculating, preparing, masking her exit strategy with casual dinner talk and fox affection. What haunted Henry more than her betrayal was its efficiency. Caroline hadn't yelled. She hadn't picked a fight. She hadn't begged or cried or distanced herself emotionally in some dramatic fashion. She had executed her plan like a marketing campaign quietly, methodically, and with a timeline. And she'd almost succeeded. If not for one fatal error, she forgot who she was married to. Henry's entire career revolved around catching what others missed. Fraud wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was a rounding error, a double entry, or a recurring charge that didn't belong. He had spent 20 years fine, tuning his instincts to spot deception. But when it came to Caroline, he'd muted those instincts. He saw what he wanted to see in a partner, not a perpetrator. Now, staring at the digital log of her failed transfers, he felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the marriage he thought he had. Relief that his systems had caught what his heart couldn't. He didn't blame himself for not seeing it sooner. Not entirely. Love has a way of softening sharp vision. It filters data through trust and familiarity. But data doesn't lie. Patterns don't sugarcoat truth. And the pattern was clear. Caroline hadn't just fallen out of love. She'd engineered an exit. It wasn't a messy affair discovered by accident. It was a series of decisions designed to look ordinary on the surface, while beneath she was moving toward total separation. Financially, emotionally, and physically, she thought she could outpace the system. She was wrong. Friday morning, 11:31 a.m. Henry Walker's phone lit up with an incoming call. Caroline. He let it ring twice before answering, his voice calm and deliberate. "Hello. Henry, my card's not working." Her tone was strained, tight with controlled panic. It was the same voice she used when a client meeting derailed or when her flight got delayed. Measured, almost rehearsed, like she was performing composure for an invisible audience. "What's your balance?" he asked, already knowing the answer. There was a pause. "Zero." "How is it zero?" "I made the transfers." You did, he replied, and the fraud detection system flagged them. They're under review. Silence on the line. No breathing, no reply. Just data catching up with emotion. What did you do? Nothing, Henry said truthfully. The system did what it was built to do. Detect unauthorized activity and prevent financial misconduct. She exhaled, sharp and sudden. How long? 5 to 7 business days. Could be longer if they find inconsistencies. Another pause. Then the call ended without a word. Henry set the phone down and sipped his coffee. It had gone cold, but he didn't mind. The moment wasn't about comfort. It was about confirmation. Everything he suspected had now unfolded exactly as his systems predicted. He opened his secure logs again and watched the events roll in, line by line. 3 login attempts from Caroline's device. 2 denied. 1 flagged and quarantined for unusual location access, Phoenix, Arizona. Not Dallas, as she had claimed. So she wasn't just lying to him. She was lying to her employer, too. That night, he didn't go out. He didn't call friends or rant on social media. He made himself a simple dinner, watered the houseplants, and took out the recycling. As he stood by the back door, the silence felt heavier than usual. Not lonely, just quiet, like the house was holding its breath. He sat at his desk later checking alerts. There were new ones, attempts by Caroline to open 3 credit cards using their joint address. All denied, thanks to the pending fraud lock initiated by the frozen transfers. She was spiraling. Fast. By Sunday, she'd called the house 17 times. Henry ignored each one. On the 18th attempt, curiosity won out. He answered. Henry, you need to call the bank, she said, rushing every syllable. Tell them it was authorized. I'm stranded. I can't buy a plane ticket. I can't even order food. Where are you? A long pause. Phoenix. Phoenix isn't Dallas. It's complicated. I'm sure it is. She tried to redirect, but Henry cut in with one final question. Did you at least call your boss? The conference organizer. Don't start. I'm just asking since you told me you were at a work event. She hung up again. The next day, something shifted. Caroline's lawyer, Patricia Martinez, someone Henry had known for years from neighborhood barbecues, called directly. This is getting messy, she said without preamble. Your wife needs access to funds, at least for basic living expenses. There's 3,000 lausen in the joint checking account. Untouched? Henry, that's not reasonable. It's what we've always kept for emergencies. Caroline considered it reasonable to transfer nearly $1 million without telling me. Patricia sighed and hung up. Henry didn't bother calling back. That Wednesday brought a strange twist, a phone call from Alan Murphy, Caroline's boss at Valerie Marketing Group. Henry, quick question. Was Caroline really attending our Dallas conference? You'd have to ask her. She hasn't returned my messages. Alan's tone shifted. We've noticed some irregularities in her expense reports, too. Thought you should know. Henry's stomach turned, not from anger, but from realization. This wasn't just a marital betrayal anymore. This was something bigger, something darker. Caroline hadn't just tried to rob him. She might have been stealing from her company as well. And this time, the systems weren't just watching. They were building a case. Monday morning began like any other, except Henry Walker now had a dedicated folder on his desktop titled, Legal Proceedings Walker Divorce. Inside were dozens of files, frozen transfer logs, fraud alerts, access histories, and bank statements, evidence not of infidelity but of something far worse. At exactly 80:52 a.m., his lawyer, William Brooks, rang. A former banking compliance officer turned legal bulldog. William had the kind of calm voice that could make court orders sound like weather forecasts. They filed, William said. Her team's pushing the narrative that you used your financial expertise to deliberately freeze marital assets. Henry didn't laugh. But William did. It's a bold move considering your system operates on automation. No manual overrides, no discretionary interference. Just cold logic, Henry replied with a soft, let's respond with facts. That afternoon, Caroline's legal team filed an emergency motion requesting immediate access to all joint funds. The hearing was set for Friday. Henry spent the week preparing meticulously. Not out of spite, but out of habit. He printed every report, annotated key events, and lined up the timestamps that showed exactly how his system responded in real time, without human input. But as the courtroom date approached, more unsettling details came to light. On Tuesday, his fraud system flagged another anomaly. 3 distinct attempts to access joint accounts through a masked IP tied to a marketing firm's server. And the most concerning part, the IP address matched Caroline's old workstation at Valerie Marketing Group. At first, Henry thought maybe she was just being careless. But the pattern deepened. That evening, the firm's lead investigator, Gregory Harris from Eastern Financial Compliance, showed up unannounced at Henry's office at Pinnacle. "We've got a situation," he said, placing a plain manila folder on Henry's desk. "Your system picked up something we missed." Gregory laid out the findings: repeated transfers from corporate marketing budgets into personal accounts over the last 18 months, all originating from Caroline's IP. Worse, they were routed through departmental discretionary funds, making them hard to detect without deep, level cross-auditing. "It's textbook embezzlement," Gregory said. "And your system's logs. Well, they gave us our first real lead." Henry felt a chill crawl up his spine. What began as a personal betrayal had now revealed itself as a multi-layered financial crime, one involving not just Caroline, but at least one senior executive at her firm. "Who's helping her?" "Thomas Wade," Gregory said. "Senior budget officer. They've been funneling funds, laundering them through false expense reports, and even attempted to sell your house under a false valuation." Henry blinked. "My house? Yours was one of 12 targeted. Undervalued listing, cash buyer, fake representative. The intention was to flip the property and disappear with the profit. It wasn't just theft. It was an enterprise." Friday's hearing was a blur of marble floors, crisp suits, and cold exchanges. Caroline entered the courtroom looking thinner, paler, an echo of the woman Henry once knew. Her attorney argued emotional distress, financial hardship, and spousal sabotage. William countered with facts. He handed the judge a printed timeline of alerts. Highlighted entries showed how the system's fraud protections activated instantly, how each transaction was flagged per compliance thresholds, and how no manual action had been taken by Henry. The judge took 20 minutes to review the evidence, then ruled Caroline would receive no additional access until the investigation concluded. The $3 in their joint checking account, still untouched, would suffice for her basic needs. She left the courthouse with nothing but a tight jaw and lowered eyes. That weekend, Henry received yet another alert, this time from the United States Attorney's Office. Caroline's actions had triggered a wider investigation. The alleged corporate theft at Valerie Marketing now exceeded $2 million. Federal charges were being considered: wire fraud, conspiracy, and possible row violations. He didn't feel anger, just something colder: clarity. His marriage was beyond repair. But in the process of protecting himself, Henry had uncovered something far larger than a broken vow. He had stumbled into a criminal web woven by someone he once trusted with everything. And now, without lifting a finger in revenge, the system was about to dismantle it, one alert at a time. Caroline's world unraveled faster than anyone anticipated. Just days after the federal indictments were filed, her life was no longer her own. The court set bail at an amount impossible for her to meet, citing flight risk and the severity of the charges: wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement on an industrial scale. Instead of the glamorous marketing conferences and business trips she once took for granted, Caroline found herself in a cold, sterile detention center, her days reduced to legal consultations and limited visits from a public defender struggling to manage an overwhelming caseload. Meanwhile, Henry maintained a quiet routine, now more mindful and cautious than ever. He sold the house they had once called home, the very property Caroline had tried to offload at a fraudulent price. The sale brought in nearly $500,000 after fees, enough to start fresh in Norfolk, where Henry bought a modest one-story home with no guest rooms to clutter or memories to taint. He didn't rush to move on emotionally, but he knew the next chapter had to be orderly and free from chaos. With a new morning ritual of simple coffee and automated market checks, Henry embraced a life rebuilt on systems he trusted, both in technology and in himself. Professionally, Henry's story became a catalyst for change at Pinnacle Financial. Working alongside his team, he enhanced their fraud detection software, adding specialized features designed to uncover corporate embezzlement rings like the one Caroline had orchestrated. His expertise saved other companies millions and prevented countless families from experiencing the financial devastation he had narrowly avoided. At Old Dominion University, Henry found a renewed purpose. Twice a week, he taught financial fraud detection to eager students, sharing real-life cases that demonstrated the vital importance of vigilance and verification. Trust but verify, he told his classes, echoing the lesson that had become the foundation of his life. Letters arrived occasionally from prison. Handwritten apologies and confessions from Caroline, expressing remorse for her crimes and the life she had destroyed. Henry never responded. He was not cruel, but he was resolute. Forgiveness had no place where trust had been weaponized. The years that followed were marked not by bitterness, but by a steady, deliberate rebuilding of trust with himself and the systems he had created. He no longer believed that love alone could safeguard one's future. Instead, he trusted in facts, data, and protocols, tools that operated without emotion but with unwavering precision. Through this painful chapter, Henry learned that sometimes justice does not arrive wrapped in drama or vengeance. It comes quietly through algorithms and audits, through patterns uncovered and truths revealed. And sometimes, it requires you to let go of what once was to protect what can still be. In the end, Henry Walker was not just a man betrayed. He was a man who turned betrayal into clarity, chaos into order, and loss into renewed purpose. The trial was scheduled for early spring, with the courthouse buzzing quietly in the cool Richmond mornings. Henry Walker prepared meticulously, not with passion, but with precision. Every chart, every timestamp, every alert was organized and labeled, ready for presentation. The courtroom itself was cold, sterile, a place where emotions were meant to be left at the door, and facts reigned supreme. Caroline appeared before the jury a shadow of her former self, her once impeccable appearance replaced by the standard prison attire, her confident gaze now downcast and uncertain. Her legal team fought hard, painting her as a victim of circumstance and a misguided soul caught in a spiral of desperation. They tried to paint Henry as cold and calculating, accusing him of betrayal, not only in marriage but in character. But Henry remained composed. When called to the stand, he spoke with clarity and calm. I did not suspect my wife's professional activities until my systems caught unusual transfers that triggered fraud alerts. Those alerts were automated, based on preset thresholds designed to detect unauthorized activity. At no point did I manually intervene to freeze accounts. The system is impartial, unbiased. It only reacts to patterns. The jury listened intently as Henry told the design of his fraud detection systems, explaining how they functioned without human intervention to protect assets and prevent theft. His testimony was precise, almost clinical, devoid of bitterness or personal vendetta. The prosecution played recorded phone calls between Henry and Caroline, revealing her cold pragmatism and her hope that he wouldn't scrutinize her accounts. He's too focused on his own systems. Her voice admitted, he'll never check my work accounts. The turning point came on day 12, when Thomas Wade, Caroline's co-conspirator, broke under pressure. His plea deal reduced his sentence from 25 to 7 years in exchange for full cooperation. He laid bare the entire scheme: budget manipulations, false invoices, covert property deals, and a sprawling network of executives across 3 states. Caroline's role as the financial coordinator, the mastermind tracking every dollar and ensuring no irregularities showed up on official statements, was made painfully clear. The irony was not lost on the court. She had learned financial diligence from watching Henry, only to use it to commit an elaborate crime. Over 17 days of trial, Caroline shrank visibly, her designer clothes replaced by institutional garb, her demeanor subdued and remorseful. On the 17th day, the verdict was delivered: guilty on all counts, multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, and Caroline's fate was sealed. Henry left the courthouse quietly, refusing press interviews and public statements. For him, the justice system had done its work. The fraud detection systems he built had not sought revenge, only truth and consequence. 2 months later, Caroline was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Thomas Wade received 9. Henry sold the house for a price above market value, sufficient to start anew without burden. The divorce was finalized quietly. No contested battles, no drawn-out disputes. Caroline's guilty plea had cleared the way for peace. Henry signed the papers, turning the page on 22 years of marriage and betrayal. He began teaching part-time, sharing the hard-earned lessons from his experience, that trust must be paired with verification, that systems can protect when people fail, and that sometimes the cold logic of algorithms is the only shield against human deceit. Letters from prison came sporadically, apologies steeped in regret, confessions born from isolation. Henry never replied. He was not unkind, just resolved. The man who once trusted blindly now trusted systems. The man betrayed but unbroken, who rebuilt a life not on emotion but on clarity and order. Caroline's 18 years behind bars were a stark reminder that actions have consequences, no matter how carefully planned or cleverly concealed. For Henry, the ordeal was not just about lost love or shattered trust, it was about the quiet power of preparation, vigilance, and integrity. He had built systems that never slept, never forgot, and never showed mercy to deceit. Those systems saved him, not just financially, but emotionally, by turning chaos into clarity, betrayal into lessons. Henry learned that trust is fragile, but systems of accountability can be unbreakable. Life had taught him a hard truth sometimes: the people closest to us can betray us the deepest. But the strength to protect oneself comes not from anger or revenge, but from foresight and steady resolve. If there's one thing Henry's story teaches us, it's this: trust, but verify. Trust must be earned and paired with boundaries that protect your peace and future. Life isn't always fair, and betrayal from someone you once trusted can cut the deepest. But what truly matters isn't how badly we're hurt, it's how we rise afterward. Be the kind of person who builds a strong system for yourself, whether that's clarity of mind, knowledge, or firm boundaries in your relationships. Because when you have that foundation, no matter what comes your way, you can protect yourself and hold on to your self-respect. Don't let emotion overpower your reason. Because in life's toughest battles, calm is the sharpest weapon. If Henry's story spoke to you, share your experience, or your own story, in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss more real, life stories of strength, insight, and transformation. Together, we grow stronger, one story at a time.